Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Curry, and we are going to be reviewing Europe in the Middle Ages, which we've been doing for the last couple of weeks. When you are done with this and on your own time, please complete the attached quiz. The quiz is going to have 8 multiple choice questions and 2 SAQ, short answer questions. Make sure you are following the format for those. And those will be on a Google form, which is also in the same email. So I'm pretty much I'm going to focus on what was going on in Europe during this time period, both Western Europe and Eastern Europe. So far, our unit, The Global Tapestry, has brought us through Africa. We've talked about Islam. And in this unit, we focused on what was going on in Europe during the 1200 to 1450 time period. Some of the topics in this unit were the Byzantine Empire, Justinian's Code, feudalism in Western Europe, the Catholic Church in Western Europe, and the Crusades. So let's review for your quiz. First off, it's very important for the College Board to see that you understand the difference between Western Europe and Eastern Europe. They're very different and evolved from different places, mainly after the fall of Rome. So after the fall of the Roman Empire, in the West, we really have the breakdown of Roman law, custom, and language, and we have them decentralize into the feudal system. On the other hand, in the East, they maintain one identity and one centralized government under the Byzantine Empire. They retain Roman laws and customs. They have urban life in cities such as Constantinople, and they have a Greek language. Another important distinction is they have different types of Christianity. In the eastern part of Europe, for the most part, they have what's called Orthodox Christianity, whereas in the West, they had Roman Catholicism, which then broke down into 2 types of Christianity, Roman Catholic and Protestant, but we'll get to that later. Another important distinction for us to remember is that the Byzantine Empire, because of its location, so we had an assignment that really had you look at the location of this area, and that was for a reason. It's really because we wanted you to identify that the Byzantine Empire, which is focused right here, the eastern part of Europe, was on several trade routes. So that meant that it had a lot of contact with the Silk Road, which was going on in the Indian Ocean trade, later what was going on in the Trans-Saharan trade. So they were getting a lot of items, they were becoming very wealthy, and there was a lot of cultural diffusion. In Western Europe, other than in Italy, some of the trade centers in Italy, there was not much contact with the rest of the world. No trade routes, no real cultural diffusion. And there was no centralized government because they had a hard time holding themselves together because they were so poor. Another important thing about the Byzantine Empire is they were able to move beyond their borders and spread their religion. Remember, their type of religion is called Orthodox Christianity, and they were able to spread this religion to Russia. So still to this day, Russia is Orthodox Christian, which distinguishes it from most of Western Europe and the United States. And they see themselves as kind of the inheritors of Byzantine Empire. So often people in Russia call themselves the New Rome. Okay. So we did a little review of the Byzantine Empire. Now let's go on to feudalism in Western Europe. See what happens there. Well, the feudal system, we're going to look at it as a social pyramid. So remember, after the fall of the Roman Empire, we have this breakdown of law and order. We have decentralized governments. For the most part, even though the king owns all of the land, he does not have power to control that by himself. And that's because There are a lot of kind of roving armies and roving ethnic groups from outside and inside of Europe, such as the Vikings and the Magyars and the Moors and all these different groups that are invading. So there's a difficult time keeping a centralized government. So what the king needs to do is get help from other rich people. So what does he do? He gives them some land. And in exchange, the king says, I'll give you this land, but you have to promise to fight for me. You have to give me some soldiers for my army when we're trying to fight against outsiders. So at the same time, these lords needed to make sure that their knights were loyal to them. So what they did is they in turn said, if you are loyal to us, we will break down our land that was given to us by the king, and we are going to let you farm on it or let you use that land as long as you fight for us and don't rebel against us. On the bottom, we have the peasants. So for the most part, there are two kinds of peasants. There are just regular peasants who are free, and then there are serfs. The serfs pretty much are not allowed to leave the land. They're not slaves because they're not owned, but they are also bound to the land. They cannot leave it. For the most part, peasants had to do all of the work. And in exchange for doing all of the agricultural work, in exchange, they were offered protection. Because remember, there was not a lot of stability, and there were a lot of people out there who made their living by robbing people. So they needed this protection. So in exchange for doing the work, they were offered protection. So the places where most people lived were called manors. And let me just talk about this manor for a second. It was agricultural based. So, for the most part, in Western Europe, you had these feudal manors, and you would have the king or the noble or the knight or whoever it is who lived in the manor house. The serfs and the peasants would farm on that. Everything that they farm would then be brought to the mill, into the workshop, and then they would make that into bread. Over here, we have the church, and then we have animals. So for the most part, this system was set up to be completely self-sufficient. In other words, they did not have to leave this 20-mile piece of land that they lived on. So this meant, for the most part, there was a very little trade and cultural diffusion. For the most part, what people did for entertainment and education and other elements of life was centered around the church. Okay. So we talked about the Byzantine Empire, talked about feudalism, how it was decentralized, and they had the manor system, which was self-sufficient. Now let's talk about the Catholic Church, which, as I just said, is the most important institution in this time period. So just as a reminder, the Catholic Church owned about 1/3 of the land. They provided people with their social and religious needs. So people believed in Western Europe that in order to get to heaven, they needed to get certain sacraments or rituals through the church, such as marriage, baptism, and anointing with oil before you die. And if you don't get these, they didn't believe that you would go to heaven. So I think the issue is that without the Catholic Church, people thought that they would go to hell. So they needed really to listen to them, but also provide the church with a lot of money. So this is how the church became so powerful. The church also provided people with education. They established the first universities. They cared for the poor, so they set up the first hospitals. And they also managed money. They were pretty good with money, as we will see in future units. There's also the issue of who's in charge in Europe, because there were many kings who themselves wanted power over their own countries. The only problem was the Pope wanted power over the bishops, and other priests who lived in those countries. So this made it very difficult and made it very competitive relationship between the Pope and the individual kings. And in this picture, we see an illustration of the concept of lay investiture. That meant that the king wanted to be able to appoint his own bishops because he said, this is my country. Why can't I do that? But the Pope wanted to keep control of that and centralize control. And eventually, the Pope won. And the Catholic Church insisted that kings could not appoint their own bishops. And this made, again, the Catholic Church showing how powerful it was. Okay, so we showed the power of the Catholic Church. The final thing that you really have to know is about the Crusades, and this is going to be an SAQ question. So, just as a review, the Crusades began in 1096 when the Pope called on people to go fight in these crusades. Christians battled against Muslims for land in the Middle East, resulting in 9 total crusades, so it lasted hundreds of years. Had a profound effect on Europe and really accelerated them out of the Middle Ages. So let's review some causes and effects. The causes. So the Muslim Turks, remember, from Central Asia, took control of the Holy Land in Jerusalem and told Christians that they could not send pilgrims there. And pilgrimage was a huge part of life in this time period. Muslim Turks also threatened to conquer Constantinople, which was the capital of the Byzantine Empire. So the Byzantine Emperor asked the Catholic Pope for help in trying to keep the Turks out or fight against them. So this led to hundreds of years of fighting, 9 different crusades. And the effects, well, we do have trade increase between Europe and Asia. The Europeans who went down to the Middle East to fight in these crusades realized that they wanted things like pepper and oranges and different spices and silks. The kings also became more powerful because the kings were leading the armies. So this ultimately led to the church being less powerful and to nobles being less powerful. So the kings were able to become more powerful and to centralize control in their little countries. Finally, we have a tension growing between Christians, Jews, and Muslims, which continues. So Jews were not particularly trusted before this time period, but Christians didn't all and out attack them. But beginning in this time period, Christians became so convinced of the rightness of Christianity that they started doing things like burning down Jewish sections of their countries and evicting Jews from their countries. So, good luck. If you have to view this again, please view this again before you take our quiz, and good luck.